The Revelation Explained, Chapter 17, Part 1. We begin with the Book of Revelation, Chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. We continue with the commentary. Here again the narrative returns to take up another series of the history. A number of times we have been taken over the same ground. It is this feature of the Apocalypse, more than any other, that has misled and perplexed commentators, attempting to explain it as one continuous narrative from beginning to end. They have been compelled to consider numerous passages as digressions, parentheses, or episodes, etc. As already observed, however, the prophecy is not arranged after the ordinary plan of histories, narrating all the contemporaneous events in a given period, whether civil, religious, literary, scientific, or biographical, thus finishing up the history of that period. But it consists of a number of distinct themes running over the same ground. In this chapter, a more particular description of the Church of Rome, quote, that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth, end quote, from verse 18, is given under the symbol of a drunken harlot. With this vile prostitute, quote, the kings of the earth have committed fornication, end quote. They have encouraged her in her corruption and idolatries, quote, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication, end quote. This latter symbol is doubtless taken from the cup of drugged wine with which lewd women were accustomed to inflame their lovers. So had this apostate church made the inhabitants of the earth, of the 10 kingdoms, drunken with her wine cup, and thus rendered them willing partakers in her abominable idolatries. She is described in 2 positions. First, as sitting upon many waters, which the angel informs us are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, from verse 15. And second, upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The first position denotes her wide supremacy in the world over distant peoples and nations. The second, the close relationship that she sustained to the civil power. That beast carried her in royal state. The civil powers of Europe have usually lent themselves as a comparisoned hack for this great whore to ride upon, and have considered themselves highly honored thereby. This beast was full of the names of blasphemy, which were the same as the blasphemous assumptions of the papacy, as explained in chapter 8, showing that he agreed perfectly with this apostate church in her impious claims, and supported her in them, making himself equally guilty and deserving of the same name. What is intended exactly by his scarlet color I do not know. The same power under its pagan form was represented as a red dragon. The appearance of this woman was that of the most splendid character, nor are we to suppose the contrary because she was such an infamous prostitute. She may have been, and according to the description was, all that, but still her appearance was such as to bewitch her admirers and votaries. Robes of purple and scarlet, with the most costly profusion of gold and diamonds, were a superb adorning, even regal splendor. All that skill and wealth could do in magnificence of attire was bestowed upon her to set forth her charms. The golden cup in her hand was as to richness in harmony with her dress, while as to contents it set forth her character. For it was, quote, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication, end quote. This cup was an appropriate symbol of her atrocious wickedness and idolatries. This woman had also a name written on her forehead. It was not indeed placed there by herself nor by her admirers, but he who drew this symbolic picture placed it there, that all might know her true character. Quote, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, end quote. Although this apostate church was only in embryo in the apostles' day, yet the apostle who gave us a careful delineation of its terrible characteristics declared that it was then developing, and denominated it a mystery. Quote, the mystery of iniquity doth already work, end quote. From 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7. The same apostle regarded as an unquestionable fact that godliness was a mystery, referenced in 1 Timothy 3, verse 16. But he who peruses the history of the papacy will be forced to declare with emphasis, quote, without controversy, great is the mystery of Romanism, end quote. She is also styled Babylon the Great. This name is derived from ancient Babylon. This city was the center of the earth's idolatry, and stood first of all as the direct enemy of God's people. So, likewise, this church is the center of earth's spiritual idolatry. There are other harlots or corrupt churches in the world beside her, but she is the mother of them all. They are all children by her side. Some of them greatly honor her, and in deep veneration call her, quote, our Holy Mother Church, end quote. But God brands her as, quote, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, end quote. But the statement that she was a harlot merely does not entirely describe her character. She was a drunken harlot, Drunken with what? Wine? No, indeed. There were a very small sin for her. That were a very small sin. She was drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Romanists positively declare that their church never persecutes. But with the picture of this drunken prostitute before our eyes, we shall be hard to convince. To illustrate this point fully would be to write a book of martyrs much longer than the present work. So, for lack of space only, we shall have to content ourselves with merely bringing forward a few of the many historical proofs showing that they themselves claim the right to exterminate heretics. Innumerable provincial and national councils have issued the most cruel and bloody laws for the extermination of the Waldenses and other so-called heretics, such as the councils of Oxford, Toledo, Avignon, Tours, Lavaur, Albi, Narbonne, Béziers, Tolosa, etc. Since papists will assert that these had no authority to establish a doctrine of the Church, although they clearly reflect its spirit, I remind the reader that some of their general councils have, by their decrees, pronounced the punishment of death for heresy. At least 6 of these highest judicial assemblies of the Romish Church, with the Pope at their head, have authoritatively enjoined the persecution and extermination of heretics. Extracts from the acts of these councils could be given, if space permitted. Number 1, the Second General Council of Lateran in 1139, in its 23rd canon. Number 2, the Third General Council of Lateran in 1179, under Pope Alexander III. Number 3, the Fourth General Council of Lateran in 1215, under the inhuman Pope Innocent III, which exceeded in ferocity all similar decrees that had preceded it. Number 4, the 16th General Council, held at Constance in 1414. This council, with Pope Martin present in person, condemned the reformers Huss and Jerome to be burned at the stake, and then prevailed on the Emperor Sigismund to violate the safe conduct that he had given Huss, signed by his own hand, in which he guaranteed the reformer a safe return to Bohemia. And the inhuman sentence was carried out, with the haughty prelates standing by to satiate their eyes on the sight of human agony. This council also condemned the writings of Wycliffe, and ordered his bones to be dug up and burnt, which savage sentence was afterwards carried into effect. And after lying in their grave for 40 years, the remains of this first translator of the English Bible were reduced to ashes and thrown into the brook Swift. Well has the historian Fuller said, in reference to this subject, quote, "The brook Swift did convey his ashes into Avon, the Avon into Severn, the Severn into the narrow seas, and they into the main ocean." And thus the ashes of Wycliffe are the emblem of his doctrine, which is now dispersed all over the world. End quote. Number 5, the Council of Siena in 1423, which was afterwards continued at Basel. Number 6, the Fifth General Council of the Lateran in 1514. The laws enacted in each succeeding council were generally marked, if possible, with augmented barbarity. Says the learned Edgar in his Variations of Popery, quote, "The principle of persecution, being sanctioned not only by theologians, popes, and provincial synods, but also by general councils, is a necessary and integral part of Romanism. The Romish communion has, by its representatives, declared its right to compel men to renounce heterodoxy and embrace Catholicism, and to consign the obstinate to the civil power to be banished, tortured, or killed." End quote. Saint Aquinas, whom Romanists call, quote, "the angelic doctor," end quote, says, quote, "heretics are to be compelled by corporeal punishments, that they may adhere to the faith," end quote. Again, quote, "heretics may not only be excommunicated, but justly killed," end quote. He says that, quote, "the Church consigns such to the secular judges to be exterminated from the world by death," end quote. Cardinal Bellarmine is the great champion of Romanism and expounder of its doctrines. He was the nephew of Pope Marcellus, and he is acknowledged to be a standard writer with Romanists. In the 21st and 22nd chapters of the third book of his work, entitled De Laesius, he enters into a regular argument to prove that the Church has the right, and should exercise it, of punishing heretics with death. The heading is his, together with what follows. Quote, Chapter 11. That heretics, condemned by the Church, may be punished with temporal penalties and even death. We will briefly show that the Church has the power and ought to cast off incorrigible heretics, especially those who have elapsed, and that this secular power ought to inflict on such temporal punishments and even death itself. Number 1, this may be proved from the Scripture. Number 2, it is proved from the opinions and laws of the emperors, which the Church has always approved. Number 3, it is proved by the laws of the Church. Experience proves that there is no other remedy, for the Church has tried step by step all remedies, first excommunication alone, then pecuniary penalties, afterward banishment, and lastly has been forced to put them to death, to send them to their own place. There are 3 grounds on which reason shows that heretics should be put to death. The first is, lest the wicked should injure the righteous. Second, that by the punishment of a few, many may be reformed. For many who are made torpid by impunity are roused by the fear of punishment, and this we daily see is the result where the Inquisition flourishes, etc. Chapter 12, quote continues, Objections answered. It remains to answer the objections of Luther and other heretics. Argument 1, from the history of the Church at large, the Church, says Luther, from the beginning even to this time, has never burned a heretic. Therefore, it does not seem to be the mind of the Holy Spirit that they should be burnt. He surely misunderstood Luther. I reply that this argument proves not the sentiment, but the ignorance or impudence of Luther. For as almost an infinite number were either burned or otherwise put to death. Luther either did not know it or was therefore ignorant, or if he knew it, he was convicted of impudence and falsehood, for that heretics were often burnt by the church, may be proved by adducing a few from many examples. Argument 2. Experience shows that terror is not useful. I reply, experience proves the contrary. For the Donatists, Manichaeans, and Albigenses were routed and annihilated by arms, etc. End quote. So this high dignitary of the Catholic Church, a cardinal, a nephew of one pope, and the special favorite of others, freely admits the charge so often laid to popery by credible historians, the butchering of an infinite number of people that differed from them, and here labors hard to uphold it as a principle of righteousness. Their bloody crusades against the innocent, unoffending Waldenses, Albigenses, and other peoples, in which thousands and the aggregate millions were slaughtered like venomous reptiles, standing out on the page of history with a prominence that cannot be mistaken, and they themselves cannot deny it. Dowling has well said that their, quote, history is written in lines of blood, compared with the butcheries of holy men and women by the papal Antichrist. The persecutions of the papal emperors of the first 3 centuries sink into comparative insignificance, for not a tithe of the blood of martyrs was shed by paganism that has been poured forth by popery, and the persecutors of pagan Rome never dreamed of the 1,000 ingenious contrivances of torture which the malignity of popish inquisitors succeeded in inventing. Page 541, end quote. If any of my readers suppose that the character of popery has changed with the lapse of ages, I must tell you that such is not the ease. Popery is unchangeable, and this her ablest advocates declare. Chase, Butler, in the work he wrote in reply to Fauci's Book of the Church, says, quote, it is most true that the Roman Catholics believe the doctrines of their church to be unchangeable, and that it is a tenet of their creed that what their faith ever has been, such it was from the beginning, such it is now, and such it will ever be. End quote. A copy of the 11th edition of The Faith of Our Fathers, published in Baltimore, Maryland in 1883, lies before me. It was written by Archbishop, now Cardinal, James Gibbons, the highest authority of the Roman Catholic Church in this country. In page 95 he says, quote, it is a marvelous fact, worthy of record, that in the whole history of the Church, from the 19th century to the 1st, no solitary example can be adduced to show that any pope or general council ever revoked a decree of faith or morals enacted by any preceding pontiff or council. Her record in the past ought to be sufficient warrant that she will tolerate no doctrinal variations in the future, end quote. So the doctrine of her inherent right to persecute and slay everyone who disagrees with her, which has been enacted by pontiffs and general councils, and so carried out in the past, is still in vogue, and would now be enforced, were it in her power to do so. While this statement of Gibbons shows the unchangeable spirit of popery, still it is the basest presumption upon the historical knowledge of the reader. The facts are that the official acts of some of their popes and general councils have been so far wrong that Romanists themselves have been compelled to admit it. Thus, the Sixth General Council, which was held at Constantinople in 680, and which every Catholic accepts as ecumenical, condemned in the strongest terms Pope Honorius as a monothelitic heretic. Let them attempt to deny it, and we will bring forward our proof. Romish authors themselves admit it, the well-known Dupin with the rest, as appears by the following extract from his writings, quote, "The council had as much reason to censure him as Sergius, Paulus, Peter, and the other patriarchs of Constantinople." End quote. He adds in language yet more emphatic, quote, "This will stand for certain, then, that Honorius was condemned, and justly too, as a heretic, by the Sixth General Council." End quote. From Dupin's Ecclesiastical History, Volume 2, page 16. The Decretals of Isidore furnish another example of papal infallibility. For ages these documents were the chief instrument of the popes in extending their power and the proof of the righteousness of their assumptions to excessive temporal authority. Wycliffe declared them false and apocryphal. For this he was condemned by the 16th General Council, held at Constance in 1414, and his bones ordered dug up and burnt, because of his daring impudence. The spurious character of these false decretals have since been proved beyond the shadow of a doubt, and since it is impossible to deny it longer, it is admitted even by Romanists. So, after all, this infallible council was wrong, the papists themselves being the judges. Pope Benedict IX was guilty of such flagitious crimes that he became an object of public abhorrence, and he finally sold the popedom. One of his infallible successors in the papal chair, Pope Victor III, pronounced this infallible profligate a person, quote, "abandoned to all manner of vice, a successor of Simon the sorcerer, and not of Simon the apostle." End quote. I do not question the truth of this assertion, but what becomes of their boasted uninterrupted apostolical succession? Baronius, the popish annalist, confesses that Pope Sergius III was, quote, "the slave of every vice, and the most wicked of men." End quote. Among other horrid acts, Platina relates that he rescinded the acts of Pope Formosus, compelled those whom he had ordained to be reordained, dragged his dead body from the sepulchre, beheaded him as though he were alive, and then threw him into the Tiber. This pope cohabited with an infamous prostitute named Marozia, and by her had a son named John, who afterwards ascended the papal throne. Through the influence of his licentious mother, under the name of John the 11th. So the unlawful amours of Sergius produced this infallible, necessary link in the holy chain of uninterrupted apostolical succession. It must be remembered also that the popes have for ages laid claim themselves to infallibility. In the last General Council of that body, held at the Vatican in 1870, it was declared a dogma of the Church. Romanists will tell us that this decree refers only to his official acts, and not to his personal character. But official acts have been the main thing under consideration in the case of Sergius, Honorius, and Benedict. But if such monsters of vice can produce good, holy, infallible acts, as papists declare, then Jesus Christ is mistaken. For he declared positively that, quote, a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit, end quote. From Matthew chapter 7, verse 17 and 18. Quote, God forbid. Yea, let God be true, but every man a liar. End quote. From Romans chapter 3, verse 4. During these dark ages, thousands of priests who were by the laws of the church denied their scriptural right of possessing a wife, referenced in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 9, and in other verses, lived openly with concubines, and the Council of Toledo decreed that they should not be condemned therefore, provided they were content with one. But the devil produced his masterpiece of iniquity in the person of Roderick Borgia, who ascended to the papal throne in 1492 under the name of Alexander VI. The utmost limits assigned to papal depravity were realized in him, so that the very name Borgia has come to be used as a designation of any person unusually wicked. Says Waddington, quote, the ecclesiastical records of 15 centuries contain no name so loathsome, no crimes so foul as his. Not one among the many zealous annalists of the Roman Church has breathed a whisper in his praise. He publicly cohabited with a Roman matron named Venosia, by whom he had 5 acknowledged children. Neither in his manners nor in his language did he affect any regard for morality or decency, and one of the earliest acts of his pontificate was to celebrate with scandalous magnificence in his own palace the marriage of his daughter Lucretia. On one occasion, this prodigy of vice gave a splendid entertainment within the walls of the Vatican to no less than 50 public prostitutes at once, and that in the presence of his daughter Lucretia, at which entertainment deeds of darkness were done, over which decency must throw a veil, and yet this monster of vice was, according to papists, the vicar of God upon earth, and was addressed by the title of, quote, His Holiness. But why stir this cesspool of filth any longer? Is not that church of which Alexander VI was for 11 years the crowned and anointed head, a necessary link in the boasted chain of holy apostolical succession, the pretended vicar of Christ upon earth? Is it not, I ask, fitly described by the pen of inspiration, quote, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, end quote, as she reeled onward in the career of ages, quote, drunken with the blood of the saints, end quote. This ends part 1 of chapter 17.